Good morning, church. And happy Father's Day. And happy Father's Day to those who play a fathering role, even if you're not a biological father. This is also to celebrate you. I want to say I'm honored to have an opportunity to talk about my dad. I'm starting already. I already said I wasn't going to cry. But if we had my father's homegoing services here, and one of my opening statements is, you know, I'm not going to be a crybaby, but I mess it up every time. Wow. To talk about my father is to talk about our daddy, because he's our daddy. He's not just my father, he's our daddy. And I can't start the story of our daddy without talking about the story of my parents, because my mother is much of an integral part of our family and how my father, my daddy, became a daddy. So, in the beginning, I'm just kidding. So my mother, I have to give a little bit of history. Mommy, I'm putting your stuff out there, so don't give me that face. My mother comes from a little rural town in Virginia, and my daddy comes from a little town in Alabama, and they met up here. So my mother married her high school sweetheart. She gave birth to 2 beautiful children out of that marriage. And she moved up here to follow her husband to, for better life, because they were in rural Virginia. Love rural Virginia, but it's rural. And things didn't quite work out the way they expected, and, they parted ways, and then they met soon to be our daddy. And so with young babies in tow, my mother separated from her first husband, and she had, one in diapers and one just out of diapers, and she met my dad, who became the daddy to my older brother and my older sister, and that's their daddy. And by the age of 26, he had 4 beautiful children. They had 4 beautiful children between the ages of 7 and 0. So there were a lot of babies in the Howard household. And I share that story because that is a story of the man that I call daddy, and he became daddy to anyone who needed a dad. Right, and the title of my speech or my story is the legacy of a running man, and you'll understand what I mean by that. But before I start, for those who know me, I've been around for quite a long time. Between being at 12, I've kind of followed Bruce, Pastor Bruce. He was my youth pastor. I was so used to calling him, but Pastor Bruce, I've followed him through many ministries. So I've been around, and you may not know, my family lived in his house on Hazelton Street. So I have a very unique relationship with the Wall family, and so I've been around for a while. And so they knew my dad, our father, our daddy. But I want to play a song before I get a little bit deeper into my story, and you'll understand. You'll understand once I start my story, the legacy of a running man. So. Okay, I won't get into the whole thing. But that really epitomizes daddy. All you had to do was call his name and he'd come running. And whether it was I needed to be moved out of my 15th apartment back to the house, because it was, every time I tried to move out, it was an epic fail, and I always wound back. up at my parents' house, or whether it was, my car or Antoinette's car or anyone else's car that broke down on the side of the highway, going back to school, Daddy came running. And the word got out that my father, whose name is Arthur Howard, also known as Cool Art, because he had a little bit of a short temper, so we called him Cool Art, because it wasn't so cool when Cool Art lost his temper. Cool Art, Dada, Grandpa, husband, father, whatever you want to call him, he always came running. And it didn't matter who asked, whether it was his mother, his sister, his nieces, his nephews, he always came running. You just had to call his name and he was running. He was always there. And when I looked back over the different types of relationship that I had with my father, just to realize this, and I'm going to tell you young people, your relationship with your parents change as you grow older, right? It grows. So when I was a baby, when we were kids, Daddy was the caretaker. He had 3 girls and a boy. And when Mommy went to work, yes, I still call my mother Mommy. And when Mommy went to work, Daddy took care of us. That meant all 3 of us had hair. He was parting our hair, putting grease and putting braids and barrettes. He was doing whatever he needed to do to make sure his little girls were not a hot mess. So Daddy was our caretaker. He went from caretaker to playmate. Daddy loved children. He loved to play games. He loved to play games. He loved to draw. So he was there playing games with us. He'd like to trick us into thinking that work was fun. And I remember we would go to I don't know if there's still a DYS facility off of Harvard Street. So before it was a DYS facility, it was just kind of like this no man's land. And Daddy would make it fun for us to take the wax off of his car. So we lived not too far from there on Blue Lab, and he would be like, oh, let's go to the park. So we'd get the dog, and we'd get on the bikes, and we'd ride our bikes to that little spot, and Daddy would get the wax out. He'd start to wax it, and we'd start fighting over who could take the wax off. Now, if that's not a genius, I don't know what is. But we would be in the shade fighting for that cloth to be able to take the wax off the car, and he'd just be sitting back watching us. But, I look upon that with fondness, and anyone who knows me knows I obsess over my vehicles. I have more than one, and I, too, can be found in my garage waxing and waxing off my car. The legacy of a running man, and keep that in mind, because fathers, your children are watching, right? Your children are watching. I'm going to get to that in a minute. So he went from caretaker to playmate to protector, right? He made sure that we were protected. He made sure that he took care of us, and everyone knew, and my sister Antoinette can attest, if you felt like you had the nerve to court a Howard Henry girl, you had to get through Mr. Howard. So dating was tricky, because Daddy was the protector. And on more one occasion, some young man said, "Hi, Mr. Howard," and my father politely said, "Mm-hmm." So he made sure nobody got through those gates except through him. So he was our protector, he was our caretaker, he was our protector, he was our playmate, he was our parent, right? He was able to parent and guide. He was present. He was there at my basketball games, at our track meets, at our choral events, and I played the clarinet, and yes, he was there too, begrudgingly, and I know he was, because I wasn't the greatest clarinet player. He was also there at anything that we participated in. Daddy showed up, and I have to say, he had mommy in tow, right? He always made sure he had his wife in tow. So he went from parent to patriarch. So as I got older, I realized this just isn't my daddy. This isn't just our daddy. He's just not there to help me out, help my sisters out, help my brother out, and he helped us all out. And I just can't tell you how many. He painted houses, he fixed cars, he fixed milk, he just did everything. He became the patriarch. Like, I begin to see him as the patriarch of our family. Like, wow. This is the same guy that drew stick figures and I thought he was a Picasso. This is the same guy who made witty, silly jokes and was my playmate. He was now leading a whole family. Grandchildren, wife. He folded everybody into. Yeah. Oof. And then the last stage, I'll pull myself together. I realized that my daddy was my friend. And I had to be about 35, almost 40, before I realized your parents can be your friend. Yeah, I'm older than I look. And my siblings, again, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a little bit of a daddy's girl. Oh. So I assume you heard my sister's outside voice. Yeah, I was his shadow. And growing up, I was up under my mother. I couldn't leave her side, right? And so I'm still a little bit like that. I kind of give myself, but I'm still kind of like up under my mother, still at the ripe young age of, I'm gonna say it, I'm 56. I feel blessed, 56. But I was my daddy's shadow. We enjoyed so much together, and I feel so blessed to have had him for the time that I did. We went to basketball games together. When I bought my house, it became his house. He referred to it as his garage. He used to bring his homeboys over to my house and sit up in the patio. Like, he'd say, oh, I'm gonna go cut your grass. And I'd be like, okay. I'd come home, the barbecue would be going, and his homies would be sitting on the patio, there'd be a plate for me, and I'd just go in the house. I'd be like, he was retired. He was having fun. That was my friend. We would sit and, like I said, we went to Celtics games. We'd sit and watch the Super Bowl together. I'm a bit of a sports nut. And we would go to car shows. I'm a bit of a car fanatic. A little bit. And it was fun. It was fun transitioning to just see him as my friend, and we would sit and we would talk, and I became a little bit, as I coined it, the Arthur whisperer. And to be a member of my family, my father had a way of being affirmatively positional sometimes, also known as being stubborn. And when he got that way, he just, he was resolute in where he was, and he'd have this tendency. Now I have to do this from behind because you have to get the full effect. He'd make this look if he said something that didn't quite agree with what he'd say. And it would be just like that, and he'd say no words. And you knew he was affirmed in his position. Somehow, by the grace of God, I had the ability to sit my father down to the side and say, you know what, Daddy, let's talk, let's go for a walk. And I became the Arthur whisperer, and I was able to get him down from his position. I don't know how I got that way, but I was able to do that. So I now see the legacy of the running man, because he'd run and he'd help. He had, like I said, nieces and nephews, and lots of family members shared my daddy, shared our daddy, and went to him for help. Whew. So now, I see those characteristics. And my older brother, he does anything for his kids. Daddy would do anything for us. Almost to the point of spoiling, but you knew he'd only go so far. That blueprint of putting your family first, that running man blueprint, putting your family first. Oh, I got to do this. I got to show up, be present for my girls. My nephew is doing the same thing with his kids. My other nephew, he's a work in progress, but he's getting there. But I can tell you one thing. I've had conversations with that little work in progress, and that blueprint of a running man is there. It's there. So what I say, I have two messages. One, to the fathers, to the daddies, your little girls are watching. They're watching how you treat your mom, how you treat your wife, because that's how they're going to wind up wanting to be treated. My father adored my mother, and it showed. That's why I'm not married, because somebody needs to adore me. And daddies, your sons are also watching you. How you handle your business, how you put your family first, how you do it. My father at one point worked multiple jobs to make sure we had what we needed on the table. He had kids in college. He was watching over grandkids. He was taking care of a wife. He was taking care of his home. He did whatever he needed to do. He worked many jobs. And when he retired, he took on the job of cutting my grass and hanging out with his homies and drinking up my liquor. I'm not gonna lie, he drank up my expensive scotch. He and his homies. But I tell you something, I miss for those days to come home, to see my grass cut, and to smell barbecue in my backyard, and have a plate with my father and his friends sitting around the patio, shucking and jiving, and me having to sit in my own house while my backyard's being occupied by a group of older men. I long for those days. But that's okay, I'll see them again. But I just want to end up by saying the legacy of the running man is right before your eyes. I'm the product of his determination, of his putting family first. Product of his love and of the love of my mother, who has stepped up to be mother and father. So thank you, Mommy, I love you. So before I start crying, because you know I already have, I just want to end by saying, every day is Father's Day. And enjoy your time with your children. Children, enjoy your time with your parents. And realize it's a journey. And when your father, when your daddy becomes your friend, you have reached the mountaintop. Because that's what family and love is about. When you can look to your daddy and say, "You're pretty cool." You probably won't say that because that's what 56-year-olds say, but I'm sure there's some vernacular that you young people use these days. But yeah, and keep in mind, little minds and little eyes are watching. Anywho, love you, God bless. Thank you.
Amen.